Back here with Chris Broussard, talking Houston Rockets. So selling tickets to see Westbrook and Harden, that's the easy parts in Houston. Who will handle the rock? That's the not as easy part in Houston, unless apparently your head coach Mike D'Antoni, who said, quote, "We're not changing much, we'll tweak it, but to say you've got to change and you can't win that way, that's BS." Broussard, can the Rockets contend without making any major style adjustments to this offense?
Look, let me say the part I agree with Mike D'Antoni on. To say his style of coaching or style of play can't win, I do agree. It is BS. I think 2 years ago, if Chris Paul doesn't get hurt, they could win it. They could have won the championship. Okay, go back to Phoenix, 2007. Obviously, they had some great teams with Steve Nash, Stoudemire, those guys. 2007, when Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw got suspended in the second round, right, against San Antonio. San Antonio went on to win the championship. They were way better than Cleveland. Phoenix could have won that series and probably would have beaten Cleveland and won the NBA championship. So his style can win. However, to not change what you're going to play the same way with Russell Westbrook, just filling him in for Chris Paul, there is no way that can work. Their season's over before it started if they're not going to change. And I got to say, James Harden, he did not change his game one iota for Chris Paul. His usage rate actually went up every year.
Yeah, I would say he changed, but it changed.
Yes. The only reason it worked to some degree was because Chris could shoot. But Russ, no, they have got to make changes. If they don't, there's no way this is going to work.
Well, so obviously they are going to use Russ different than they use Chris Paul. Like, if they don't, then what do they do? Then he said we're going to make tweaks.
Let's just do the press conference again. What would you have said? Because obviously he doesn't win the press conference.
Well, I mean, he might not have won it for you guys. I think what he said makes perfect sense. What he said is this, essentially, and he not only did the press conference, he did a long-form podcast with Adrian Wojnarowski where he talked about this a lot, where he said, listen, we had one of the greatest offenses ever doing what we do 2 years ago. Last year, we had the best record in the NBA the second half of the season to go along with a top-5 defense. Obviously, 2 years ago, we can say it was Chris Paul's injury, but even with Chris Paul's injury, they had a double-digit second-half lead in Game 7 at home, and they couldn't close. Last year, once Kevin Durant went down, what D'Antoni said was, we went from the hunter to the hunted. It changed our mentality, whatever it was. Those last 5 quarters of the season for them were an abomination. But it is not an indictment to me on the style with which they play. You're right. They turned Chris Paul into a glorified role player because James Harden was having last year the greatest individual isolation season we've ever seen in NBA history, and one of the best scoring seasons we've seen in modern NBA history. But how will they use Chris Paul? They'll do a spread pick and roll with 3 shooters on the court, something he was never able to do in OKC, or very rarely.
Westbrook.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's when Harden's on the bench?
Or when Harden's one of the shooters.
Okay, that's a change.
Yes.
And I'd like to see Harden do that. Look.
Harden has to buy in. Harden can't assume it's going to be exactly what happened last year, just with a different guy playing the role of Chris Paul.
I just don't believe, even if Houston had won the championship, come back and make some adjustments. All right? I do not believe he does not have a system. Forget the offensive end. Even if he said, you know something, in the postseason, we got to put a little more emphasis on defense. I would have loved to hear that. He didn't say that. You know what else I'd love to hear? During the regular season, they don't practice a lot in Houston. They do a lot of walkthroughs. They probably do less practicing than any other team. You know something? I'm going to look at potentially tinkering with our regular season to see if we need to make some adjustments that might help us in the postseason. Even if I wasn't going to change, I would make people think that I was going to change, and I would be open. They got a new coaching staff. So we're getting ready to run the same system with all these different coaches that weren't here. I mean, to me, if you're going to get better, the way you get better is by doing things a little bit different. And they really do have to come up with a system for Russ. Any team that Russ is on, you need a system for Russ to be able to take advantage of what he does best. And what Houston, in the system and the analytics, it doesn't lead to Russ playing as the most efficient game. That's all. You need to help your players out.
One of the things that makes Greg Popovich arguably the best coach in NBA history is he adjusts to his players. When he had the Twin Towers, Robinson and Duncan, he played a certain way. Then he built around Duncan. They were defensive oriented.
Yep.
Then he went to Tony Parker as the focal point of the offense. When they won in 2014, they shot more threes than they usually do. Now they don't shoot as many threes. He adjusts to his personnel. And D'Antoni's not alone in this, but D'Antoni's weakness, he doesn't adjust at all. So when he went to New York and didn't have the personnel to play his style, they were horrible. When he went to LA and had really good players, but not the personnel to play his style, they were horrible. He has got to adjust to Westbrook. If they play the same way, with whatever little tweaks means, it's not going to have a chance.
Okay, so 2 points. One is, he has totally changed his style with Houston than what he ran anywhere else. They are
Phoenix was similar.
No, Phoenix was
ball
7 seconds or less.
But ball-dominant point guard.
Yes.
Ball-dominant point guard doing everything.
Absolutely.
That's essentially the same thing. Nash, Harden.
Right, but running up and down the court in Phoenix as opposed to playing at a slow...
They ran for threes, though.
Right. Which team we were talking
Phoenix.
about? Phoenix, yes. They ran for threes. Houston, much slower pace, but he's doing what he did with Steve Nash, except on steroids. He's just going all in on, we think we have the best player on the court. We're going to leave the ball in his hands more than anyone. But I just want to ask you both this. Do you think they're going to, next year in Houston, they're going to ask Russ to do the things they asked Chris Paul to do, or do you think they're going to change?
I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know. That's my answer.
It would be crazy to ask Russell Westbrook to do what they asked Chris Paul to do. I think it's obvious to everyone. You've got one guy who is, at this point, even though he's a very good player in Chris Paul, a below-average athlete for his position, given his age, and the other guy who might be the best raw athlete in the league.
But this is the thing, Nick. Besides playing up and down, there is nothing you can do for a great athlete. You can't throw a bunch of lobs to Russ as a guard. Like, what else do you do?
You can spread the court and have him run a pick and roll where he can beat his man. That's what you can do.
Well,
something that they couldn't do with Chris Paul.
He's going to be great with the ball in his hands and the floor spread. There's no question about it. Like, if Harden...
But this is the problem. Harden is not great when he's off the ball.
Right.
Last year, he shot 70 catch and shoot threes. That's only 7%. He shot over 1,000.
Yep.
Nick, he shot 500 three-pointers where he had 7 dribbles. 1.
Right.
7 dribbling. 500.
Yep.
Shooting 500 threes is a big season for anyone. So it's not his style. Harden's going to have to change, which typically means the coach is going to have to talk to Harden to be able to force that change. That's all I'm saying.
And I don't know that Mike will do that because Mike is not confrontational with his players. And that's the thing. Look, if Harden is going to be off the ball and when Russ has it, that'll work.
Of course it'll work.
But last year when Harden was off the ball, he just stood around and watched.
And that was, A, because he was so rarely off the ball, that was his time to rest. He'll be off the ball more this time because Russ will have it more. And B, one of the reasons he shot only 70 catch-and-shoot threes was because no one could generate them. No one on that Rockets team
could have.
He cannot beat his man off the dribble anymore.
He can generate open looks for his teammates.
I think that some of what we saw in the playoffs and the way they play defense, all right, Chris Paul can still beat his man off the dribble. All right, so he wasn't a problem as far as Harden not only getting 70 looks. It's the system that only generated 70 looks for Harden.
All right, I want D'Antoni to talk to Harden. I want Brett Brown to talk to Ben Simmons. I want everyone to sit down this offseason and have big tech. No commercial break. See you later in the show, Broussard. Thank you very much. Coming up, is there a chance we see Gronk in a Patriots jersey this season? Oh, next on First Things First.